At 8:14 a.m. local time, the Caribbean Sea appeared almost too calm. The water was smooth, sunlight shimmered across the surface, and visibility stretched for miles. From a distance, it looked like the kind of morning mariners would call completely routine. No storms, no nearby commercial traffic, nothing to hint that anything unusual was about to unfold. But inside the Combat Information Center of a U.S. Navy destroyer operating lawfully in international waters, the mood changed in an instant. A new surface contact appeared on radar. Then another, then three more. Within seconds, 5 separate tracks lit up the display. Small warships, low profile, moving quickly. At first, their course ran parallel to the American ship. That alone was not especially unusual. Venezuelan patrol vessels had shadowed U.S. ships before, and professional navies around the world do the same. What made this moment different was what happened next. At 8:17, all 5 contacts changed course at the same time. Not randomly, not gradually, together. Their new headings angled inward, tightening the spacing between them and the American destroyer. Speed increased as well, shifting from a routine patrol tempo to something far more deliberate. 20 knots, then 23. The closest point of approach, the CPA, began shrinking quickly. On the bridge, the officer of the deck stayed calm. He did not need to raise his voice. Logged the course change. Maintain speed, maintain ROE. The rules of engagement were clear. The U.S. ship was not inside Venezuelan territorial waters, and there was no basis for escalation. But staying calm did not mean letting down their guard. Every movement, every radar signal, every degree of turn was now being documented. Bridge-to-bridge hails were sent out. This is a United States Navy warship conducting lawful transit in international waters. You are closing distance at high speed. State your intentions. No response. The message was repeated in Spanish. Still nothing. By 8:20, the picture on the radar screen was saying more than words could. The 5 Venezuelan warships were no longer simply shadowing. They were positioning. 2 moved slightly ahead of the U.S. ship's bow. 1 dropped back to port. Another widened to starboard. The 5th remained directly astern. It was not a hard encirclement. It was more subtle than that, a loose box designed to apply pressure without making the intent too obvious. Inside the Combat Information Center, trackers updated vectors while electronic warfare specialists monitored for emissions. So far, there was nothing openly aggressive. No fire control radar, no visible weapons activity. But intent is not always signaled in dramatic ways. Sometimes it reveals itself through timing, angles, speed, and distance closing minute by minute. At 8:22, one Venezuelan vessel accelerated again, pushing past normal patrol speed. Its bow wake sharpened. Infrared sensors picked up a rise in exhaust heat. This was no drifting movement. The ship was committing to its approach. The American destroyer did not alter course. That decision mattered. In encounters like this, the first ship to turn often gives up the advantage in perception. A later account can frame that turn as avoidance, retreat, or acknowledgement of pressure. The U.S. Navy understood that better than anyone. Presence was the message, not provocation. At the same time, the posture on board shifted quietly. Long-range optical systems zoomed in, pulling hull numbers, deck activity, and crew movement into sharp detail. Every frame was time-stamped, every second preserved. Below deck, the electronic warfare suite began cataloging faint signals. Routine surface search radar sweeps, low power, but clearly intentional. Someone on the watch team said it under his breath. They're painting us. Not targeting, not making threats, but watching closely. By 8:24, the nearest Venezuelan ship had closed to within 5 nautical miles and was still approaching. Crew members could be seen on deck near the forward gun mount. No one was visibly manning weapons, but helmets were on, and every movement looked purposeful. This was not an accident. This was not confusion. And still, the U.S. ship held steady. No alarms, no dramatic announcements, no sudden rush of noise, just disciplined silence and precise logging. Because this is how modern naval confrontations are often decided, not by who acts first in the most dramatic way, but by who can pressure the other side into reacting while never crossing the line outright. At 8:26, as the distance narrowed and the formation tightened, one final note appeared on the destroyer's internal status board: intent trending aggressive. That was the moment the situation shifted from observation to measured response. Venezuela appeared to believe that 5 ships would be enough to create pressure. What came next would show them what controlled escalation actually looks like. By 8:27 a.m., this was no longer something that could be dismissed as coincidence. On the radar screen, the geometry no longer suggested parallel movement or routine shadowing. The 5 Venezuelan warships had settled into a pattern naval officers would recognize immediately. Not a direct strike formation, but something just below that threshold. Close enough to create tension, flexible enough to deny hostile intent afterward. This was classic gray zone maneuvering. The nearest vessel, now less than 4 nautical miles off the U.S. destroyer's starboard bow, adjusted course again. Only a few degrees, but enough to tighten the intercept. Another ship mirrored the move from port. The one trailing astern edged closer as well, carefully preserving the spacing so the American ship could not reduce speed without appearing to give ground. Inside the Combat Information Center, voices remained calm and precise. CPA now 3.2 miles, speed 25 knots and increasing. Formation is coordinated. That final word mattered most. Coordinated meant command and control. It meant this was not one captain acting alone. Someone elsewhere, ashore or on another platform, was likely watching events unfold in real time. The U.S. destroyer transmitted another bridge-to-bridge hail. This is a United States Navy warship. You are conducting unsafe maneuvers. Alter course immediately. Again, there was no answer. Instead, at 8:29, something new appeared on the electronic warfare console. A narrow radar sweep, low power, surface search mode, but unmistakably intentional. They're active, the EW officer said. Surface search. They were tracking the ship. It was not a fire control lock, and that mattered. That line had not been crossed. But switching on radar while continuing to close the distance still carried a clear message without saying a word. We see you, and we want you to know it. On the bridge, the captain studied the feed without any visible reaction. The rules of engagement still held. No weapons had been aimed, no missiles prepared, but the point for a measured response had arrived. Show presence, he said. Nothing more. The instruction moved quietly through the ship. Long-range cameras tightened in, capturing sharp images of deck crews, mast layouts, and gun mounts aboard the Venezuelan vessels. Every motion was documented. Every angle was saved. Below deck, the destroyer's 5-inch gun shifted slightly, just enough to be seen through optics, not enough to suggest targeting. It was a signal, not a threat. At 8:31, the Venezuelan formation tightened once again. One ship surged ahead, its bow cutting aggressively through the water. The wake made the situation obvious. This was sustained speed, far beyond a routine patrol setting. The pressure was no longer symbolic, it was deliberate. Still, the American destroyer did not break course. Speed remained steady. Heading remained steady. Silence remained intact. That restraint was not hesitation. It was calculated. In encounters like this, escalation is not always dramatic. Often it is controlled, deliberate, and designed to force the other side into a decision, step back, or cross a boundary that cannot be taken back. At 8:33, observers on deck reported visible movement near the forward gun mount on one of the Venezuelan ships. Personnel were taking position nearby, not operating the weapon, but clearly ready. Inside the CIC, the assessment changed again. Intent confirmed. Pressure maneuver ongoing. The captain gave a single nod. Launch the helo. The order was not emotional, it was procedural. Within minutes, the MH-60 Seahawk's rotors were turning. The helicopter lifted smoothly from the deck and banked low across the water. No aggressive maneuvering, no dramatic display. It climbed steadily to 200 feet and positioned itself between the American destroyer and the nearest Venezuelan vessel. Its sensors came alive immediately. High-definition electro-optical cameras, infrared tracking, laser designation. Non-lethal but impossible to misread. Through the Seahawk's nose camera, the Venezuelan ship filled the frame. Engine heat glowed brightly. Faces on deck were clearly visible. The image was sharp enough to read posture and tension. They knew they were now being watched up close. Then the transmission came. Venezuelan naval vessel, this is a United States Navy helicopter. You are operating unsafely in international waters. Alter course immediately. Your actions are being recorded. The message was calm and direct, then repeated in Spanish. For the first time since the encounter began, the Venezuelan ships hesitated. It was slight, almost invisible to the eye, but on radar, it stood out. Speed dropped by 2 knots. The lead vessel's bow shifted by a single degree, enough to move away from a collision track. They had not backed away completely, but the pressure was no longer moving in only one direction. Because now, the situation was no longer 5 ships pressing one destroyer. It was 5 ships facing an entire system, one that documented everything, escalated with discipline, and never surrendered control. And now, the next move belonged to Venezuela. By 8:35 a.m., the encounter had entered its most delicate stage. The U.S. Navy Seahawk held steady at 200 feet, its rotors cutting through the humid Caribbean air as it maintained a controlled orbit. From above, the geometry was unmistakable. 5 Venezuelan warships were no longer loosely aligned. They were positioned inside a tightening envelope around the American destroyer. Not an attack posture, but close enough that every captain involved understood how quickly a mistake could change everything. Inside the helicopter, the sensor operator tracked the ships one by one. Hull numbers were logged, crew positions were noted. The forward gun mounts remained unattended, but sailors stood nearby, close enough to make their readiness clear. Engine heat confirmed sustained output. These vessels were not drifting. They were holding under power. Back aboard the destroyer, the bridge stayed calm. No alarms, no shouting, just data. The helicopter's live video fed directly into the Combat Information Center, layered with radar tracks and electronic intelligence. This was no longer just a visual standoff. It had become a fully documented military encounter, unfolding second by second. At 8:37, the Seahawk adjusted its orbit, edging closer to the lead Venezuelan ship, still within safe limits, but near enough to remove any doubt about the message. The helicopter's laser designator pulsed briefly, casting a faint green glow across the vessel's bridge windows. Non-lethal, clear, impossible to miss. The radio call followed at once. Venezuelan naval vessel, you are approaching a United States Navy ship at an unsafe distance. Alter course now. This interaction is being recorded for international review. Again, the message was repeated in Spanish. For a few seconds, nothing changed. Then the first shift appeared on radar. The lead Venezuelan ship began to slow. 25 knots dropped to 22. Its wake shortened. The bow, once aimed directly into the intercept path, eased slightly off axis. Not a withdrawal, not yet, but no longer a direct challenge either. Inside the CIC, the watch supervisor recorded the change. Contact 1 decelerating, heading adjusting. The Seahawk held its position, sensors fixed, optics steady. This was the moment professional navies understand without needing it explained. Pull back too early and pressure returns. Push too hard and the risk rises fast. The American response stayed exactly where it needed to be, firm, visible, and controlled. At 8:39, the helicopter shifted its attention to the second Venezuelan ship, the one holding wider to port. The camera zoomed in. Movement on deck began to slow. One sailor lifted binoculars toward the aircraft. Another stepped away from the gun mount. Then came the next shift. That vessel reduced speed as well. Across the formation, the effect spread. One by one, the Venezuelan ships started making small course and speed corrections. Nothing dramatic, nothing they could not later describe as normal navigation. But the pattern was obvious. The loose box around the American destroyer was opening up. No one celebrated. This was not a triumph. It was control. At 8:41, the Seahawk widened its orbit, now circling both the lead ship and the vessel off the port side. Its presence remained constant, and its cameras missed nothing. Every radar sweep from the Venezuelan ships was logged. Every course adjustment was time-stamped. Every pause was preserved. This was the real strength of the U.S. Navy. Not just firepower, but discipline. One Venezuelan ship tried a brief face-saving move, adding a knot of speed before settling back again. The helicopter did not respond. No warning, no added pressure, just steady observation. That silence said more than any threat could. At 8:43, the vessel astern, the last ship still holding pressure, finally eased out of formation. It drifted back, opening the gap to more than 6 nautical miles. The encirclement was over. Moments later, the radio came alive for the first time. United States naval vessel. We are conducting sovereign patrol operations in proximity to Venezuelan waters. The wording was careful, political, and clearly meant for the record. The American reply came quickly and without emotion. This is a United States Navy warship conducting lawful transit in international waters. Your unsafe maneuvers have been recorded. Maintain safe distance. No argument, no debate, no course change. By 8:45, the Seahawk climbed slightly, shifting to a higher observation altitude while keeping all 5 ships inside sensor coverage. Below, the destroyer continued on its original heading, steady and unaffected. By now, the message was impossible to miss. The U.S. Navy had not fired a shot. It had not changed course. It had not raised its voice. And yet 5 Venezuelan warships had been pushed to adjust, quietly, gradually, and on record. The encounter was no longer about pressure. It was about who had just lost control of the story. By 8:47 a.m., the tension had clearly changed shape. What only minutes earlier looked like a coordinated pressure maneuver was now coming apart in real time. On the radar display aboard the U.S. destroyer, the once tight geometry of the 5 Venezuelan warships began to loosen contact by contact. Distances opened, headings drifted. The loose box they had built was quietly dissolving. No alarm sounded, no victory was announced. The change spoke for itself. The Seahawk remained overhead, its presence steady but no longer intrusive. From its elevated orbit, the aircraft's sensors captured every moment with clinical precision. The lead Venezuelan ship, which had been the most assertive, reduced speed again, from 22 knots down to 19. Its bow turned another degree outward, creating a broader lane of open water ahead of the American destroyer. The second ship followed, then the third. Each adjustment was small enough to deny any clear concession later, but together they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. The pressure was over. Inside the Combat Information Center, the watch team tracked the changes in silence. Contact 1 opening distance, Contact 2 matching speed, Contact 3 drifting astern. The captain watched the display without saying a word. This was the result professional navies aim for, not domination, but control without escalation. At 8:49, the Venezuelan ships began reorganizing into a loose trailing formation behind the U.S. destroyer, increasing their distance as they settled in. It was a familiar posture, one meant to preserve presence without inviting confrontation. A shadow, not a challenge. The American ship gave no response, no turn, no speed change, no acknowledgement. From the Seahawk's cockpit, sensor operators zoomed in on activity aboard the nearest Venezuelan vessel. Crew members who had earlier stood near the forward gun mount were now stepping back. Helmets came off. One sailor briefly raised an arm toward the helicopter. Not hostile, not submissive, just human. The helicopter stayed on station, recording everything. At 8:51, one final radio message came from the Venezuelan formation. United States naval vessel, we will maintain safe distance during our patrol. It was the closest they would come to a concession. The American destroyer answered with the same calm tone it had used from the start. Maintain safe distance. Continue safe navigation. Nothing more. The Seahawk widened its orbit once again, climbing to 500 feet as the situation stabilized. Its sensors remained fixed on the group, but the nature of the encounter had clearly changed. What began as a calculated pressure move had ended as a documented step back. By 8:54, all 5 Venezuelan warships were beyond 6 nautical miles, running parallel courses well clear of any intercept path. The American destroyer continued forward without interruption, its wake cutting a clean line across open water. There were no high fives on the bridge, no celebration in the CIC, because this was never about winning a moment. It was about holding the line, staying disciplined, and making sure the record showed exactly who stayed in control. It was about owning the record. Every maneuver, every speed change, every unanswered radio call, all of it was now preserved, time-stamped, geolocated, and impossible to dispute. In modern naval encounters, what happens afterward can matter just as much as what happens in the moment. Video, radar data, and radio transcripts often carry more weight than force ever could. They shape diplomatic messaging, influence command decisions, and define the story long after the ships have cleared the area. Venezuela would later describe the incident as a routine patrol interaction. The United States had no reason to argue in public. It did not have to. The record already spoke for itself. By 8:57, the Seahawk received clearance to return to the ship. It broke away smoothly and banked back toward the destroyer's flight deck. Below, the Venezuelan ships were still visible on the horizon, still present, still observing, but no longer setting the pace. As the helicopter touched down, the deck crew secured it in practiced silence. The encounter was over. Not with threats, not with chaos, but with restraint, documentation, and a course that never changed. 5 Venezuelan warships had approached a U.S. Navy ship, apparently believing that pressure alone might force a reaction. Instead, they were documented, outpositioned, and quietly compelled to step back without a single shot being fired. And in the Caribbean that morning, that was the only outcome that mattered. By 9:02 a.m., the sea had settled back into the same calm it had worn earlier that morning. On the surface, nothing looked unusual. The U.S. Navy destroyer continued on its original heading, engines steady, sensors active, and crew members returning to routine watch rotations. Far behind, the 5 Venezuelan warships remained at a respectful distance, still visible on radar, but no longer relevant to the ship's course or mission. The encounter was finished, but its consequences were only beginning. Below deck, analysts began assembling the full record. Radar tracks were matched with optical footage. Radio logs were aligned with exact timestamps. Course changes, speed shifts, and sensor activity were reconstructed minute by minute. This was not drama. This was evidence. In modern naval operations, this stage can matter more than the standoff itself. Because the real contest is not always fought on the water. Sometimes it plays out later in the after-action brief, the diplomatic cable, or the command review that shapes what happens the next time 2 warships meet at sea. From a strategic point of view, the Venezuelan maneuver had failed across the board. If the goal was intimidation, it did not work. If the aim was to force a course change, that never happened. If the intent was to create a political moment, the result was the opposite. 5 ships had tried to apply pressure. 1 ship absorbed it without giving way. That imbalance is the real lesson. Venezuela's Navy knows it cannot match the United States ship for ship. Its approach relies instead on friction, close passes, ambiguous movement, and moments built to provoke a reaction. These are gray zone tactics designed to stay just below the level of open confrontation. But gray zone tactics depend on one critical thing: the other side losing discipline. That never happened. The U.S. Navy answered with a playbook refined over decades of similar encounters, from the South China Sea to the Persian Gulf. The pattern is always the same: establish presence, record everything, escalate deliberately, never give up control of the narrative, no warning shots, no abrupt turns, no emotional decisions, just steady movement and constant documentation. That restraint was not weakness, it was control, because restraint forces the other side to make every move visible, every acceleration, every hesitation, every step back. And once those decisions are documented, they cannot be undone or explained away so easily later. Somewhere ashore, Venezuelan commanders would likely review the footage from their own ships and compare it with what they knew the Americans had captured. They would see the same reality the U.S. Navy saw: a maneuver that began with confidence and ended in quiet disengagement. No dramatic confrontation, no clear win to claim, just a careful step back. For the sailors aboard the American destroyer, it was simply another logged encounter. Another reminder that most modern confrontations never become headlines precisely because they are handled correctly. No explosions means no viral clips. No shots fired means no breaking news banner. But that does not make these moments unimportant. They shape what comes next. They establish expectations. They define limits. They teach lessons without bloodshed. The message delivered that morning was unmistakable. Pressure alone will not move a U.S. Navy ship operating lawfully in international waters. Presence will be met with presence. Escalation will be answered with discipline. And every move will be recorded. That lesson matters far beyond the Caribbean, because the same playbook applies everywhere, from contested straits to crowded sea lanes where rival navies test one another every day. The side that stays calm, stays consistent, and stays professional usually holds the advantage over time. As the destroyer moved forward through open water, its wake stretching clean and unbroken behind it, the 5 Venezuelan warships faded into the background, still there, but no longer in control. And that is how modern naval power is often exercised. Not through chaos, but through restraint so disciplined that it leaves the other side with nowhere to go. So here's the question worth asking. In a world where one wrong move can spiral into a much bigger crisis, is this kind of disciplined restraint the most effective tool a Navy can use? Or does it simply invite the next test? Let us know what you think. Because out on the open sea, the most important confrontations are often the ones that never make a sound.